kind of, we'll pick up in this conversation here about where things stand in terms of the redistricting efforts, the ed reform efforts that have been happening across the state of Vermont over the course of the last year. So it started off with House Bill 484. It turned into law, Act 73. It has been signed into law. So it means that all the provisions, all 147 pages of it, are intended to go into effect. The piece that's most important and pertinent to us, I think, right now, is the fact that the law set up what's called a redistricting committee, and it is their job to take a look across the state and decide how districts should be combined to meet the parameters. And the parameters are each of the new districts should have between 4,000 and 8,000 students. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means potentially in terms of us down here. So their job is to come up with 3 separate recommendations about how to redistrict. And then on December 1st, they're to present it up to the legislative committee. And then the intent is the legislature is supposed to vote on one of those recommendations before the session is over. And so they have opened up a short window for districts to kind of be able to communicate, what our needs are, what we'd like, things that we don't want to lose that are important because they're a part of our community and the traditions that are here. And so that's a lot of what this meeting is about tonight, is to be able to kind of talk about those things. For me to be able to hear the ideas and the concerns that the people in this forum have. And then I'm going to combine those ideas with what I got from Ludlow Mount Holly yesterday. I'm going to craft a communication to the redistricting committee. It'll go out to the community for some final input. And then the goal will be to get it in their hands by the end of September. Because they only got it's only 3 or 4 months away. They got to make that. They got to make that recommendation. So what I'm going to do, how I'm going to start things is I'm going to just throw up numbers and data up here, which hopefully will be a little bit fun because these ones are very easy to understand. The idea is to generate thoughts about things that we might want to communicate, to give an idea in terms of actual numbers out there, what the potential impact in our area might be. So that our communication is a little bit more honed. Once that's done, there's basically 3 sets of questions that we're going to use to kind of facilitate the conversation and get those ideas out of the folks that are here. So kind of get started. So Act 73, right? It had a couple of really broad goals. A lot of it was a response to the dramatic increase in taxes that happened over the last couple of years. To be clear, those increases happened because of legislative actions. They did not happen because of what school districts did, which is one of the things I think that's a little bit hidden here. So these are the broad goals, right? They want to redistrict the state, bring districts together so that you've got 4,000 to 8,000 students in each one. And the reason to do this, which is a legitimate reason, is there's an economy of scale there, right? It's a lot cheaper to run, potentially fewer buildings, which is where they will end up, than it is to run more. And with larger student populations potentially in a building, it's more cost effective to be able to run programs so you can do more things for kids. More extracurricular activities, more academic programs, more things that folks could desire. So to take a look at what this potentially means, I took the amount of actual land square miles in the state of Vermont and divided it by 4,000 and then divided it by 8,000. So what this means is that we're going to end up with somewhere between 9 and 18 larger districts across the entire state. That's what those numbers say. So if they follow through, that's where we're going to end up. And so a lot of the calculations that I did, the little star in front of the 13, I was shooting kind of for dead center between 9 and 18, right? Because things aren't uniform around the state. Student population isn't uniform around the state. And so the idea, it's not going to be 9, it's not going to be 18, it'll be somewhere in the middle. So I chose dead center. The other piece, right, it's all about education funding reform. Property taxes in Vermont have been ridiculous since the time I was deciding, even before Act 60. And so they're trying to find a way to bring property taxes down and to make things a little bit more viable for the people that live here. The other thing that it's attempting to do is to set what are called the statewide standards. This is a big one we're going to touch on for a little while, and hopefully I've got some teachers out there. And that's, they're setting minimum class sizes. They're standardizing what the graduation requirements are and what the curriculum is that needs to be taught across the state. Everybody's got to be doing the same thing. And then cost containment. They're hoping to, bring taxes down and then keep them from increasing over time. Right. So these are the broad goals. A lot of this was focused on, at least in the discussions that they had, was to come about because when you're bringing districts together, you should need fewer central office personnel, superintendents, business managers, special ed directors, and things like that to run things. So again, and if you're online, please just speak out if there's questions. I
might have some people in the lobby. I don't know if someone's letting them in.
Yeah, let me see if I can. Yeah, I'm the only one here, so.
Okay.
There we go. Actually, if you can keep an eye on that, let me know.
Sure thing.
But sometimes it pops me up a piece here. Sometimes it doesn't. All right. So by the numbers, Vermont land, right? There's 9,250 square miles in the state of Vermont. If we assume 13 districts, you are looking at 711 square miles per district, right? And so this is everything being equal, right? It's going to be a little bit different from that in practice. And to kind of compare that to where we currently sit in Green Mountain Union, right? In the school district on this side of TRSU, you are 129 square miles right now. And Ludlow Mount Holly on the other side is 44 square miles. And people are already kind of complaining in some cases about the length of time for busing and things along those lines. And so you are potentially looking at being 5 times the size you are now in terms of Green Mountain, somewhere in that range. And again, a lot of this is just to generate thoughts for when we start to have our discussions. To put a little bit kind of finer resolution on things, right, the population density changes depending upon where you are in Vermont. A lot of this stuff that they're looking at is real easy to do in Chittenden County because when you have 300 kids per square mile, right, it doesn't take that many square miles to get up to 4,000 or 8,000 kids. But in Windsor County, where we are, we have about 6.5 students per square mile. So that means to have a 4,000 student school district here, we'd have to cover 615 square miles. If it was an 8,000 student district, it would have to cover 1,230. So these are dramatically huge areas of land to potentially have to bus students around in. And especially given the fact that we're Vermont and busing students those distances in bad weather could be problematic. And then just a reminder of where we could be, right? It's going to be somewhere between these two numbers. It has to be because the law says 4,000 to 8,000. But I can't tell you exactly where it'll land. And that's part of what we want to influence with our communication. This is a piece, and like I was saying, I'm hoping that there are some teachers online because this was a piece that was kind of hidden. Right, when they came out and said, yeah, we're gonna save you a lot of money by doing this, they never really said what the impact was going to be on teachers. The focus was on loss of central office, and so I did a little bit of calculations, right, because all they talked about was these minimum class sizes. Well, to get to those minimum class sizes, there's going to have to be some cuts. So there are approximately 6,440 classroom teachers in Vermont. So this is just the teachers that run a class, your 3rd grade teacher, your high school science teacher. This does not include like special education, extracurricular courses, anything along those lines. To get to their bare minimum, 1,402 teachers are going to have to be laid off across the state. It'll be larger than that because I don't know how those layoffs are going to impact support staff and the other teachers, you know, instructional coaches and things like that. So they're looking, without saying it, when they put this together, of cutting 22% of the teachers in the state of Vermont at a minimum. And a couple folks popping up here. So,
Can I ask,
yeah,
does that reduction in teacher staff include the exception for special ed and AP classes that the legislation has?
so that this is outside of that. So this does not include any special education teachers. It does not include the exceptions. This is strictly your classroom teacher, your third grade teacher. Like I said, your science teacher, foreign language teacher, that sort of thing. Okay. So all the other ones are excluded from this calculation. If you add those other folks in, and because they are teachers, that number goes from 6,440 up to about 8,000. And again, I don't know what the potential impact is going to be on those 600 other teachers. So the cost savings, again, and I call it hidden because they didn't really talk about this. Average teacher salary in Vermont right now is $66,536. The cost of benefits is $44,573. So each of those teachers, in terms of the cost to the education fund, is $111,000, a little bit more than that. You've got your administrators, so that's your superintendent, that's their average salary in the state of Vermont. You got your business managers, average salary, sped directors, average salary. And again, they share the same benefits that the teachers do. So if you average these three together, right, just to get a generic amount for the savings in the central office administrator, it's $166,241. Now, what are the savings going to be? Well, from the teachers, if those 1,402 teachers are laid off because of what the law requires, there's $155 million in savings from the teachers. From the central administrators, you know, we're using 13 districts, so there'll be 13 superintendents left, 13 business managers, 13 special education teachers, somewhere, special education directors, somewhere around that. So the savings from central office administration is a little bit under 20 million. Total of 174 million. And we want to put this in perspective. Education fund this year, 2.7 billion. What percent is this savings of the 2.7 billion Vermont is spending on education? It's about 6.5%. If you reduce the average tax bill in Vermont, which is around $6,000, by that 6.5%, your tax bill will go down to $5,612. You're going to save $388 on your overall tax bill on average. And so that's a part of the question is all this pain, which is just looking at personnel, and then combining it with the massive shifting around of people and resources, the need for new busing and everything else and all the costs that's going to go along with actually trying to make this change. Is it worth it? What I was talking about, and we have to take the human aspect out of it. Oh, Ann, I see your hand. Give me just a moment. Take the human aspect out of this is that the amount of savings predicted by the governor by this massive shift is about 180 million, 184 million, somewhere in there. So most of it is probably due to the staff cuts. And the question is, if this is going to get you where you predicted you were going to go, why the heck are you going to do all this redistricting? Because the real thing that's going to have the impact is here. And I'm not a proponent of this, just to talk about it. Ann, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so two questions. One, when the special educators were left out of the initial numbers of the cuts that would have to be made and, you know, job loss, is that because they're protected from that, or was that just not a figure that was calculated in the main number?
So my guess is in terms of the special special educators, it
Yes.
would be hard for them to cut them because they are providing federally mandated services.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. And so you don't know if there's any wording and protections yet for that in the
No.
in the plan. Okay, second question. Let's assume that there's not wording like that. Okay, there's not protections. This potentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, if we have potential teacher cuts, then that changes for special education students, that changes their supports and services in terms of their supports in the classroom. Would that not also imply that at some point more self-contained classrooms would be added in order to accommodate those students who no longer get supports and services within the gen ed classroom?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
logical. Again, you can't say definitively until it happens, but it's logical to say that, yeah, you're going to have to add something somewhere else to provide the support that they're losing.
So less special educators means a more restrictive could mean a more restrictive classroom environment.
Yeah, or an increase in the number of special educators and support staff we have.
Okay.
The way that they are limiting that, whether it was intentional or not, I couldn't say.
Yeah, I haven't seen any wording that would protect, you know, I haven't seen any wording yet that would protect special educators specifically.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's hard to see the writing on the wall of what this will do to special education students receiving special education services.
Yeah, and they will be impacted.
Oh, yeah.
Because that foundational budget.
Yeah.
The way that they're kind of going after it, if this was the intent, was they're not saying you have to cut special education teachers under the law, but we're going to limit the funding we're going to give you so you have no choice.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for taking my questions.
Yeah, no, good questions. I
Thanks.
like it. Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, sort of following up on that, Layne, do you have any sense where the Scott administration is going to stand on federal cuts? Because the Trump administration is already attempting to cut statutory programs. And so, like, following up on Anne's question, okay, if the federal law continues to say that certain services need to exist for certain classes of students, then all of Anne's assumptions come into play. It gets even worse, I think, if the Scott administration, I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing it gets worse if the Scott administration doesn't have a firm position on how they would fund those things if federal funds fail.
Yeah. The only thing that I can say, and again, it's all kind of implied, is if I look at the actions that have happened in the last month or so, the Scott administration and the state of Vermont did sue the federal government to restore the federal funding that was lost. So I don't know if that means that that would continue in the future or not, but it's the only current thing that I can kind of point my finger at that might give an indication of what direction they might go.
Yeah, I mean, that the attorney general did I don't think actually the Scott administration joined that lawsuit. It was one of the ones that our attorney general did, but not the administration. I could be mistaken on that.
Yeah, no, the only reason I'm thinking it's Scott administration is because who appoints the attorney general, and if they're appointed at all, and who do they work for?
Well, we actually vote for our attorney general here, so she does coordinate with the Scott administration, but she's spoken out about a couple of other lawsuits that the Scott administration chose not to join, that were state versus attorney general. So I hear your point, and also I think it is different here in Vermont.
Yeah, no, which is good. So no, I don't. There's been nothing that's been really shared or really talked about. And that's the only thing that I can think of that might, provide an indicator of where the state at least is currently, in terms of what folks are thinking. Any questions on this before we kind of start to move into the conversation, kind of facilitated discussion piece, parts and pieces? So the recording is on. That way I don't have to take notes while I'm listening to folks' ideas, and maybe asking questions to keep the conversation kind of going a little bit, to dig a little bit deeper into what we're talking about. But the things to kind of frame this communication that I think are important, and there may be more, is the idea of communicating about what's important in terms of our community identity, right? We kind of touched on that a little bit earlier today. You know, who are we? What do we value? What traditions do we have? What things do we want to preserve at all costs? Another piece that comes up, which I think is a concern across the state, is that if we are absorbed into a larger district, how is equity going to be ensured, right? How do we know with a single board that may be 600 miles away from us that they are going to ensure that the amount of funding we are getting and the support that we are getting is the same or equal to all the other schools in these larger districts? There's obviously the logical feasibility, which is the thing that usually comes to people's minds first is, you know, if you got a 711 square mile district, how are you going to get those kids to where they need to be in a reasonable amount of time that's not going to impact them in terms of the schooling? And then the last one is this idea of confidence and efficacy. You know, where do people feel this bill is really going to take us? Is it going to solve the problems that it's trying to solve, or is it going to potentially create more or have no impact at all? That's a huge question. So just to kind of frame the conversation a little bit. So we'll start off with this idea about community identity, and this is where I'm going to shut up for a while because it's hearing from you and being able to take your ideas, your thoughts, and put them into that communication to that redistricting committee on behalf of the TRSU. So I threw a couple of questions up there. These aren't the ones you have to stick to, but just to kind of start hopefully generating some thoughts and some things to talk about. And you don't have to put your hands up if you're online because it's hard to see. So if you've got ideas and things that you want to talk about, just speak up.
I know I'm listed as Wendy, but this is Zachary.
Hey.
So I think one of the things, I guess, just to think about, and I don't know if really a lot of talk has been done on this part of this, but under the local control part, you know, part of the plan is towns will no longer get a vote on their school budgets. That's all going to be just sort of handled at a state level. And I think that's, I don't know, that really removes most local control as far as the community goes. I don't know, I personally think that's a terrible idea.
It's a really good observation. Ludlow Mount Holly talked about it last night. And there's this idea that we're all equal taxpayers here because we all pay for everybody else, which implies that you should have voice in pretty much anything that happens in education across the state, whether it's your district or not. So a really good thing to bring up, Zach. Other thoughts, other pieces that are important? Yeah.
Well, I think it's important to most people who have school-age kids and maybe those with don't have school-age kids to know that the town they live in has a school or local school. I don't know what it would take to change your mindset to, you know, live in a town that had a school, but now it's part of a larger grouping. Maybe over time there'll be an identity with that grouping. But I think that's a real concern.
Oh, it's a really good point. Other parts and pieces, or add on to what's already been spoken.
I'm worried on Zoom that I'm going to talk over somebody. So if someone was about to talk and you want me to stop, I can.
Okay, no, you're good to go.
Okay. So, you know, my focus, my priority based on my own family is students receiving special education services. And one of the things about when schools have to adhere to IDEA and FAPE and all those acronyms that, you know, most of us or some of us know back and forth. And we talk about the least restrictive environment. And that usually starts with students being allowed to go to their neighborhood schools or their community schools. it seems to me like if it's not obvious at this point, I think I can say this because the somewhat disastrous effects that are likely coming down the pike, it would seem to me that this would be one that maybe is not talked about often, but is a concern for me because when we start growing, making the district larger, you're no longer talking about community neighborhood school. You're no longer talking about, um, the continuum of least restrictive. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
What?
I'll see if I can facilitate your idea a little bit.
Yeah.
Right, I think what you're saying is it's an undue hardship on all
Yes.
students, but it's going to be an even larger one in terms of a lot of students that may have disabilities and special needs.
Exactly. Which seems to be, there's always kind of a disproportionate fallout for students, that are kind of, I'm trying to think of the best, let's just say students receiving additional supports and services. There's always kind of a disproportionate hardship to those students. But when we start talking about, busing students, that becomes even a bigger problem because then you're really busing not only to the nearest neighborhood school, but then you're hoping that your nearest neighborhood school also has the programs that your student needs. And if not, then you could continue, you could keep getting pushed down the bus line. It just seems like it's rife for some real concerning practices ahead.
Yeah, no, very, very, very good points. Kind of related a little bit in terms of Ludlow Mount Holly was this idea that given how spread out things are here, given how big the potential districts in southern Vermont could be, it might make sense that every student in every grade has school choice. That way, you have the option if you want to go to the school that's closest to you, or if you have a school that has programming that may be a little bit farther away. I don't know if it would really solve everything, but it was just an idea that they had that I thought, seemed pretty neat. So other parts and pieces here. Remember, you're trying to feed me all the information you can so that I can craft this communication.
Sure. This is Sarah again. Sarah Stoll from Proctorsville. So I have another thought. It doesn't answer your questions exactly, but it goes to the nature of having schools in communities. And so one of the things that I find difficult is that I'm hard pressed to see people moving to a place with no school. We do have some towns in Vermont with no schools, and we do have some towns that only have elementary schools. And anecdotally, certainly some of the towns that have lost their elementary schools, there seems to be some indication that people are moving there less. So we live in a tourist area, right? So we know people will purchase a second or third home here, but whether or not people can afford to live here or to move here is a different question. And even if you can afford to move here, will you move to a place that has no school? So that's a question that I bring up when we talk about the local schools, and I think about what it does, or what I assume will continue to happen, which is kind of gutting the population base that makes up a town. So that's one thing I'd like Governor Scott to talk about. Another thing is that I think that there's an undercounted population. If we look historically at the population of Vermont, it has generally increased when we have had a large influx of immigrants. We're in the midst of having a decent influx of immigrants who were uncounted in the last census, and given the current administration's way of handling the censuses, will be unlikely to be counted even if they do a census before the 10-year period is up. So I also think that there's a missing population that somebody needs to quantify and then qualify, right? Because those folks they're working on our farms, they're working on our roofs, and I'm not talking about H2A and J1 folks, I'm talking about people who are here to live and work, right? So I think that's another question that we should be asking the administration. Who are you counting when you're counting Vermonters? And are you considering, when you put out incentives for people to move here, more than folks who have enough money to buy a house here and can work remotely? Are you also considering the folks who may not be able to afford to buy a house or even to rent here, but who are absolutely not working remotely? They are working the jobs that are most important to keeping your society running, right? Building your houses or fixing them, or working on your farms, or working in the service industry. So those are a couple of things that I think are kind of important. Also, because if you don't consider that population, then you're also potentially going to have, it's a difficult population to serve anyway in Vermont, because we're not, it's sort of new. I suppose you could argue that in a larger district, sure, there'd be more resources, but when I hear your very astute breakdown of what it means to get rid of a certain quantity of teachers, then either you're not going to have the personnel to serve, or you're going to save even less than that approximately $400 sum that you came up with, because you're going to have to hire people to serve specific populations. So that's something that I would like this committee to consider, because I find that it's a population that goes completely unmentioned.
Yeah, no, very good comments. And I just want to remind people, if you don't see me writing a lot down, it's because I'm recording, because it's the easiest way to capture. If I'm writing something down, it usually means that you struck an idea that might be worth kind of talking a little bit about, or including in the community message. I think one of the pieces that you hit upon that generated an idea for me about the local schools is there's a ton of research out there in terms of student success and student achievement being associated with parental involvement with the schools themselves. And when you get that geographic difficulty that's put into place that is going to prevent parents from being able to be as involved, you're kind of defeating the purpose of trying to improve student achievement over time. So really, really good thoughts. Who wants
to add to that, Layne? I mean, it's worth quantifying the amount of community and parent dollars that went in if you charged a wage for all of the effort that went into building the new playground at Cavendish. And I'm certain that, probably Ludlow and CAS have very similar, like, oh, we did this and thank goodness people showed up, right? They showed up with their hands, they showed up with their skid steers. So it's a good point to make.
Yeah. Last word on values and identity before we move on to the next kind of category of thought. Yeah.
Well, just if we're looking at Chester, or looking at Andover, or any of the Cavendish surrounding towns, you have on their school governance with a 4,000 to 8,000 student SU, school district, whatever you want to label it. What percentage of the governance would be from our local town?
If I recall, and somebody correct me because I haven't looked at the number lately, I think your school board, right, there'll be one board, I think it's 10 people. So, and how much of it is representing here or not? It's going to depend. I'd have to go back and read if they put in, what the provisions are. My guess is it probably would be based upon, population of the towns. But it's 10, I believe is the number. It's either 8 or 10, but I think it's 10. Yeah. And so those are the people that would have to say. It gets a little bit easier again. I think anyway, this model in terms of Chittenden County, right? It's kind of like Boston, you got 5 square miles, you've got a school district with 10,000 kids in it, having a superintendent, a special education director, having a single person to do that. Even in those places, it doesn't quite work out the way they want. So you end up having this middle management layer that's a part of it. I can only imagine that would be more important with the bigger distances. But in terms of governance, when we talk about it, when it comes up, it's school board, right? But it's also your administrators. What do you have for an administration? How do they interact? What are their responsibilities in terms of these newer districts?
And with these school boards, Layne, would they be I mean, I know we don't know for sure, but would they be election or appointment based?
They are election based, and I'm going to apologize because I was reading 454 as it was changing. So sometimes I remember fragments from when it was the act, and not what changed when it was the bill, and not what changed when it became the act. So good. What was the question again? Go back for me.
No, the question, and again, no apologies because none of us can memorize. We can't memorize this stuff. Will the members in these new school boards and the governance, will it be appointment based or election based?
It should be election based is my remembrance.
Right.
I also remember during the discussions that the powers that they have will be limited. And there is a power shift from the board towards the Secretary of Education and the governor.
So I guess if we're talking about identity and I forget what was the other part of what was the other subheading on your slide? Identity and
Values and identity.
values and identity. There it is. Values and identity. Then I think that's a big one. If people care about local governance and want to preserve that, then this would be a major discussion point.
Very much agreed.
Layne,
Yeah.
Mark Youngling from Weathersfield. I just have a quick question. Do you have a sense at all as far as what would happen in terms of policies and procedures and all the work that's gone in from all the different supervisory unions, how that transforms when we swap over to a larger district? And I think that really plays into directly our local community's character and the importance of the policy work that they've put in. Do you have any idea, any inkling on how that might transform when we walk over to a completely different governance structure?
The state's going to tell us what they want us to do, and all the districts across the state will do it. Right? That's a part of what they're pushing for is that standardization. So whether it's curriculum, whether it's programming, all those parts and pieces, what's expected for a student to be able to graduate, all those things are going to be dictated by the state. In terms of like local policy and procedure, I think that's a little bit of a grayer area. It seems to be implied that the state's going to have a lot of input into that. But one of the things that we've been kind of focused on here with some of the work that we're doing, the principals especially have been doing a lot of work on, is this idea that if we're going to do this work, and we do it well, it may not go to waste. Because if we do it well, it may be what the bigger district adopts. And so that's kind of what we're shooting for right now. So again, I think it's a little bit rare when you get to local policies, but the implication seems to be that the state is trying to standardize everything for everybody. So best answer I can give you. I wish I had a little bit more.
I don't expect you to have a crystal ball. Thank you, Layne.
You're welcome.
When you're talking about standardizing everything, I guess my comment goes back to your initial slide where you're talking about the dollar values. So when they calculated the savings, did you say that was based on, like, for example, the average teacher salary? Because one of the things, so I've served on a bargaining unit recently, and the teachers that remain, it's not going to be the average pay. The highest paid teachers aren't going to take a pay cut to join lower paid teachers. In reality, what the unions will do is they'll negotiate up to the highest paid teachers. So the cost of the remaining teachers will actually go up significantly. And I would assume that administration would be the same because, you know, a superintendent who currently serves 400 students who may now be serving 1,000 is not going to work for the same amount of money.
Oh yeah, if they go down to 13 districts, give or take, superintendent salaries, I would expect them to be 250, 300,000. There are other impacts as you're striking thoughts as you're talking for me. Typically, in terms of the union, it's unclear whether they're going to negotiate with the unions. My understanding is they were doing a lot of research before they embarked down the idea of Bill H 454 to see what powers the legislature actually had in terms of labor bargaining. It might be imposed. If it's not, the union rules typically, right, seniority wins. The folks with the most seniority stay. They are the most highly paid. The least paid are the ones that will be cut.
Yeah, I figured that was the way that the reduction in force would go, but I don't know. I know some of the larger unions in the state of Vermont, and I don't know. I don't think you'll have teachers if they try to not work with the teachers union. I think there'll be statewide strikes. So I think they're going to have to negotiate with us, and those salaries, they're going to be not based on the average. They're going to be based on whoever had the highest salary within the new consolidated district. I'm pretty sure that all the salaries will move up to that level.
Yeah, they have to. They even, to their credit, they even said that early on in the process, and I don't remember if it was the governor or the secretary, but with fewer teachers taking on more responsibilities, we're going to be able to pay them more, and that is our intent. So yeah, I think you're hitting everything right on the head, which is good. One of the things that, at least here in talking with some of the other administrators in the district, most of the superintendents that are around, we tend to be a little bit older. A lot of us could decide to do something else or to try to stay in Vermont, or a lot of us are going to retire. That's going to be the truth with the teachers as well, I believe, is a lot of folks will probably, if you're facing a layoff and you're close to retirement, retire. Is the state going to be able to fund all those new retirements that they just forced into happening? I don't know. But so there's other consequences and things that may have an impact that I don't think they really considered too strongly. But yeah, good conversation. It's striking a lot of ideas. Other thoughts in terms of equity and resources, how to make sure that in these larger districts, everybody's getting a fair distribution of what are going to be very limited resources based upon how they're setting up the foundation formulas.
Layne, because I don't want to be one note and I don't want to monopolize the conversation. Are you open to having emails after this sent to you with some thoughts?
Oh,
and
yeah.
concerns?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Because I don't.
had quite a few already because people couldn't attend, which was wonderful.
Yeah. Okay. Because I'm kind of tired of hearing my own voice, and it is pretty one note. So I'm just gonna email. I think you know where my concerns are at, and I'll email in more detail. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Other thoughts on equity and resources?
Layne, is it safe to say that when this redistricting happens, focus is going to be able to, you'll take a look at the map and they'll say, okay, our densities are in these areas. These are where we should probably focus the school systems. So the people in the rural areas are the ones that are going to be having to travel more. So the challenge to me would be, if everything's in the higher density, Springfield, Rutland, Brattleboro, wherever these, in southern Vermont specifically, these rural areas are going to have to be brought in. And those are the areas that are going to get less of the pie, basically, and have to do more of the effort. I guess that's the question really, is how do we make sure that we're still in these areas getting a fair shake if we're having to do the work to get our kids there, to volunteer there, to do all these things. And their communities are what's going to benefit. Springfield will benefit with the school systems. Rutland would, Brattleboro would, but these areas are going to, without a school system, we suffer. So how do we take part? We take a look at the athletic programs and say, hey, a certain amount of games have to be played here and there for the communities to stay engaged. Do we have to have different, maybe the towns have to work with the school systems to bring community events to the towns? Like, I'm not sure how to keep some type of community sense with the school system if it's not going to be part of our community. So
yeah, and that's a huge equity piece, right? If I commute almost an hour each way each day, and it has an impact. And is it really fair if the school is in your town and it's a half mile up the road? Is your student really getting the same education as a student that's got to sit on a bus for an hour and a half in the morning and an hour and a half in the evening. Are they going to be able to perform? Are they going to be have the energy, especially halfway through the school year, to be able to compete? I think it's a good point. Yeah, go ahead. Last word at all on equity and resources?
I guess that I would be curious to know. I know that one of the arguments that I say in consolidation is, oh, well, more students will have access to AP programs and things like that. But I think in reality, when you're talking about this large of a consolidation, those classes are going to fill up so quickly compared to, their existence in one district and not another, that I'm not even sure that really it's going to give access to students to those. And I'm not huge into sports, but also think about sports teams. Each building has one of each teams usually, and a lot of those teams have a fixed number of students, which means less people will be able, or fewer people will be able to participate in those sports as well, because the team will fill up faster.
Yeah, they turn into cut sports, right?
Mhm.
The kids compete, and the ones that the coach feels don't have the skills end up getting cut and don't get the opportunity. Yeah, it's a good.
What about mental health supports and services? How has that on anybody's radar in terms of concerns of making sure that cuts don't dip into that as well, that an already difficult need to meet doesn't become more of a burden, doesn't become more of a I don't know, I guess it doesn't increase the higher number of at-risk students?
I agree. They have not addressed it as far as I know. I mean, but that's a pattern, right? There are a number of things that they haven't addressed, and I can give you two simple ones, right? And because we experience it in this district, is they've had a problem in terms of getting bus drivers across the state for years. And part of the reason is because it's not easy to get trained as a bus driver and get your CDL. The state has never stepped up to fix that problem, and they're going to exacerbate it with these larger districts because the need for bus drivers is going to increase. And so I think this is kind of the same thing. People, as far as I can tell, are highly aware of the lack of mental health services across the state. But no, I have not seen any efforts going into remediating that, except for, talking about it when it comes up. So I agree with you that is a deep concern.
And do you think that it's fair? Because do you think it's fair for, I know some of us may feel the same. I'm feeling frustrated that like many of us saw the writing in the wall for this. And it feels like I just wish there had been a stronger pushback when we still had a chance, it feels like, to say, we can't go this direction. Am I alone in that frustration, you think, in feeling like we had it, like, I wish we had gotten more people interested in pushing back on it when it was kind of being formed? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. What I remember was the folks that were around when the vote was happening, is that when it passed, the legislators were shocked that it passed, right? I don't think the time was put onto it because they figured it was going nowhere.
Yeah. I guess
Yeah. So so one of the things about this communication is we'll get it put together. The leadership team here will talk about it with all the ideas. It'll go back out to the community to hopefully generate more feedback that we can add to it. But one of the things that I think I'm going to try to manage, if folks want to help, is that when that communication goes out, if we can get folks in the community that are interested to that day or closely around that day, is to really send out some pretty strong messages to their legislators.
I think you can yes. I think put me on that list.
Coordination, I think, is going to be key, because I don't believe where this may be headed until that committee actually makes its recommendation and the legislature actually votes on it.
Yeah,
'Cause-
I'm just hoping we have a few off ramps, but yeah,
Yeah.
put me on that list. I know there's quite a few of us. Probably, I would bet everyone on this Zoom and in attendance there with you would say, "Put us in, coach." Like, yes.
So I'll reach out. I'll send that out as a community message as well. And I've got the contact information that I can get from the Superintendent's Association of all the legislators. And
Okay.
if we can kind of send that out a little bit, I think it's important.
Thank you.
Layne, the redistricting commission also has published all dates, and I believe that the general public can tap into those proceedings as well.
Yeah.
Layne,
Layne,
I'd like,
Sorry about that. Go ahead. And then
Yeah.
don't,
if it's possible, I'd like to add something else. I really appreciate the slide that you did with what the potential savings would be. And I don't want to diminish that for anyone, but it's not a hell of a lot of money. I think it would be interesting to take a stab at a comparable slide for what some of the costs might be. One of the things that often strikes me when we're having any conversation about education budgets is it's easy to blame the overpaid, underworked teacher, right? I say that in quotation marks, right? We see it a lot, and one of the things that we blame teachers the most for is healthcare. So I work at another institution where I get healthcare, and I'm fully aware because UVM loves to send me letters telling me how much I cost them for my healthcare. And I look at it and I think if we allow the conversation to be about how those of us who are lucky enough to have health care or a decent salary are the problem, rather than the problem is the absence of, for example, a healthcare system that is accessible to everyone and not necessarily employer based, then we allow the debate to carry on and it pits us against each other. And I just wonder if you can come up with numbers of at least what some of the imagined costs might be of some of the issues that have been brought up today. One, so we can see, like, is my $400 really a savings, or is it $400 less than, I don't know, the $800 that we might have to pay because we have to bring on new people. And then the other thing that I think is that we just need to bring up the fact that costs around healthcare are out of our control unless the state chooses to take that on together. And so I just think it's an important thing to put into the conversation, because I get tired of hearing people blame people who actually get something that we all want and need, like healthcare.
Yeah, it's the costs I'd have to think about. When they came up with the governor saying, this change will save 184 million, the folks that actually generate the numbers came back and said, we have no way to calculate what the cost or the savings could be given the complexity of this. And so the difficulty of it, if the experts that do this all the time are saying that it's not possible, I might be able to pick a few things out of impact in terms of, cost just in busing. If I'm paying, $200,000 a year for a student that desperately needs an outplacement and their trip just doubled, the length of their trip, those are things that we can calculate. I do not, just in my gut, I do not see any savings coming from this at all, with the possibility of 10, 12 years down the road when they get to the point that they're going to start closing schools, which they will do. Their way that things are set up right now is to get everything in place by 2028. And once the new administration and the new boards are fully up and running, their first task is to start to evaluate the schools in those new districts. So yeah, it's they admitted it themselves. It's nearly impossible to calculate. But there are certain things I'm certain that I can do, but it won't be the whole shebang. I may be able to pick a strand here and there.
Not to mention to have a school for 4,000 kids, and you're gonna be building these things. So there's a lot of upfront costs that have to quantify, and then how does that offset over the cost of this plan for the next 20, 30 years?
Yeah, the piece, and you're hitting on it now, we talked about it earlier, probably a few months back, was the state of disrepair, right? This building's got PCB problems, we're 10, 12, 15, 20 million to repair that, to remediate that, if we even can, without having to rebuild the whole building. The low estimate in the state of Vermont for getting the schools to where they are appropriately serviceable, so not in good shape, appropriately serviceable, is $6 billion. The whole budget, and it's high right now, it used to always sit around 2 billion, it was 2.7 billion this past year. I mean, there is no way in heck that they can have an impact the way that they think they're going to. Because if you start shifting kids around to other schools, you're gonna have to put them in a state of decent repair.
Yeah.
It's gonna cost you money. Yeah. So yeah, really, really, really good points. We kind of touched on these questions a little bit along the way, but I do want to open it up in case there are other ideas that popped up as we've been having this discussion tonight.
Can I ask?
Yeah. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah.
I don't know that the outcome is inevitable. And I know three recommendations are supposed to come out of the committee December 1st. And the legislators have to approve one of them. They may not approve any of them. But I know some of the municipalities have started doing things on their own, like Woodstock, are we looking at any beneficial relationships to kind of accomplish that?
They started those discussions because we're in, there's superintendent's groups by region. So we're in that superintendent's group. They started those discussions quite a while back. I haven't seen much more moving forward on it. Right now, the basic tone and tenor I have seen is wait and see. Because there is still a lot of belief that there's no way in heck that this is gonna go through. Remember, I think that the most telling thing is gonna be when people start to get upset and start to express that frustration. That's when they'll make their decision. And they tend to back off pretty quick because they're elected officials. The other piece that I'll throw out there that been in the back of my mind as somebody who's, approaching end of career anyway, is, if the teachers go on strike, that's going to have an impact, right? Because the kids aren't going to be able to get the instruction. Some of the smaller schools will be able to continue having the kids in the schools, but they're not going to get the instruction that they need, and certainly not that the teachers could definitely provide. No one's ever talked about the fact of all the superintendents and principals walking off the job, because then no kid gets taught, and because most of what we do is keeping our districts within the legal regulatory requirements, this whole state will be in quite a mess in terms of having legal liability placed on it. And if it looks like there is a potential catastrophic outcome to what they are deciding, I don't know if folks would do it or not. I'm game. I care about the kids too much. I also care about the staff. As an administrator, as a superintendent, and back when I was a manager in private industry, there was always a safety net. You never want to have to lay people off. You never want to have to cut people. And if you do, you want to be able to help them into their next position, wherever it may be. They have no plan for a safety net for these people that they're going to cut. I don't want to be in the position to have to engineer, the demise of 1,402 teachers across the state of Vermont. It's they didn't put a lot of thought into that aspect of it, and the human aspect is, it's education for heck's sake. The human aspect is teachers and kids. But anyway, off my high horse. It's been a lot of thinking lately. So, governance and representation. Any kind of final thoughts on this?
Layne, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
How's this going to affect like BBA, private public school? Is it gonna have the same effect or?
So the parts and pieces of it, Scott, that I read, because I was looking back through the final bill today, is originally when it was a bill, before it became the act, when it was a bill, they were pushing to kind of expand entrance into a lot of the private schools, and without having a lot of requirements for those schools to meet to be able to take public funds. In the act, that got a lot stricter and a lot harsher. And so I don't know if that hit on the question that you were asking, or if I missed it, let me know.
I'm just curious on, their funding. Are they gonna lose, are they gonna have their own district basically, or can they have their own district? Can they go off on their own because they're technically not?
Yeah, there are a few schools in the state, private schools that the state kind of treats like a public school, because they don't have a public school in that region, and so they kind of serve that purpose. I think there's like 5 of them. The rest of the schools are private, right? They're bringing in their income from the tuition payments that happen. We do have school choice. It does allow students to go to private schools as long as those private schools meet certain requirements. And so that will continue to be the case. But I think from what I was looking at today is the requirements that those schools have to meet have gotten a little bit stricter.
So like Okemo Valley, isn't it Okemo Valley School? Or Okemo, I can't remember what it's called, but the one in Ludlow, they could actually grow potentially.
Yeah.
And do their own thing outside of a district.
Yeah, no, most certainly.
That's something to think about.
One of the thoughts. Go ahead.
I was just going to say to Scott that the way that I'm understanding this legislation, and maybe feel free to clarify, but I think it actually reduced the ability of parents to send their kids to private schools, including the 5 academies. And so one of the things that occurred to me to talk to you about, Scott, because I know school choice is something that you are interested in, is it seems like this legislation is limiting that. Am I misunderstanding it rather than, because I don't think I think you'd have to pay to send your kid to Okemo Mountain School, not that the state's going to say, here you go, here's a voucher.
Yeah, they ended up raising the restrictions. So if for a student to be able to go to a private school, the private school has to meet certain requirements. I'd have to go back to get the specifics of it, but they made that more stringent. So yes, it is harder now that this act has gone into play.
Well, I mean, if you wanted to go crazy, and I even hate to talk like this, but like Andover, for instance, we had 18 kids in the school system last year. We had more that were paying to go to that school, but a lot of them are homeschooled. And it was almost $1 million that we paid to our district. But then we also paid like it was almost like 1.2 million to the state of Vermont. What would happen if we withheld that money? What if all towns withheld their money from going to the state of Vermont?
We'd get sued probably and have to pay it. The private school piece is something that I'm happy to research a little bit more. And I'll try to put it in the board report, if not this month, then in October. I did not have private schools in OSSD. I didn't really have private preschools there either. So there are certain pieces that I haven't had to work with in a lot of detail, but it's easy enough to read up on things and be able to report out on that. So Scott, if you have, I've got the general idea, but if you have specific questions that are above and beyond, shoot them to me in the email and I'll make sure that I go and I do that research and I bring it back to the board.
Will do. Thank you.
And
Yeah.
Can you look as well, Layne? Because again, I may have stopped reading the news at some point and missed something crucial. But we used to be in a district with Londonderry, and those kids all go to Burton. And my understanding from the conversation was that if, for example, there are restrictions on going to those academy schools, so I'm talking about the 5 academies, not like Okemo Mountain School or Killington Mountain School or the Christian Academy. But if there are restrictions, then those areas that send their kids to Burton or to Thetford or St. Johnsbury would have to build their own high school. And if I'm anywhere even close to correct, that's going to be a huge budgetary burden on all of us that's outside of like Woodstock building a new school, or if Chester gets to keep its school and we have to build something new. Am I correct in that, or did I stop reading at a crucial point when I got sick of the news?
I'll be more comfortable if I go back and look at it. Like I said, what I remember was a big, in the bill before it became law, I remember them trying to relax all those regulations to make it easier. It got more stringent, which is one of the reasons it passed. That made it more palatable to a lot of the legislators. But I'd have to go and look at what the specific language is around, what the new requirements are. But I'm happy to look at that. Like I said, it's an area that I don't know much about, so it would be good for me to get up to speed on it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Layne, but isn't this 454 or whatever it is now? Didn't they axe the Act 60 in this bill?
Well, you've got your foundation budget, right? So it's kind of similar to what they've always been doing, and your yield is kind of a foundation amount, right? If the yield for the year is $8,000, that means that every school for each student that it has is getting $8,000, right? That's the equity piece of it. The foundational budget does kind of the same thing, but it's the state that is setting the amount that districts get based upon their own formula. Whereas in terms of the old way of doing it, we all put in what we need to run our districts, and the state goes out, divvies it up amongst the taxpayers and raises those money and says, this is what you get per kid based upon what everybody was asking for. So to me, in looking at it, that piece is similar. The place where they may get themselves into trouble, and they tried to put something in to prevent this from happening, was they wanted to allow districts that wanted to provide more money to pay for it themselves from their own kind of town taxpayers. And so that kind of breaks that Supreme Court ruling in Vermont about equity, right? Because that means the rich districts who have more money obviously will be able to pay more above and beyond that foundational amount than the poorer districts. And now we have unequal education again across the state. Long-winded response. Sorry about that.
Layne,
Layne,
sorry. So is my understanding that part of this act that passed is dependent on a successful redistricting, meaning if we gum up the redistricting, then doesn't the whole thing stall?
The latest read that I did, yes. So if they fail to vote, it kind of comes to a screeching halt. The piece that I don't know if it's still in there or not, it was in an earlier version, was that if the legislature failed to make a choice, that choice would go to the state school board and they would make it. But I think that piece came out of the final legislation. I'd have to go back and look, but it's a really good observation. That's why I'm saying a lot of us are just kind of in a holding pattern. We're nervous and we want to plan for this because we want to make sure the kids and the teachers and the staff are taken care of. But there's not really a heck of a lot we can do until we see which way the wind is blowing in, December to March.
Well, and not just that, but it might be a productive strategy to intentionally not do anything. I mean, I've been in education in Vermont long enough to know that these things frequently just, flush away before they ever really happen. And my concern is that districts are going to start thinking, oh, we got to get ahead of this. So they start making drastic decisions that they might regret. And in the end, nothing happens. But the ones who jump the gun end up with something maybe not as great as they had before because they thought it was imminent. Like, I don't know, my personal opinion is we should try to gum up the works and stall and make it so that it just wait it out so it goes away. Cause I'm not convinced this is imminent.
Yeah, I'm not either, but the way to ensure it is to make the legislators nervous about keeping their positions, right? I think they are uncomfortable enough about it when it passed. I mean, I think they were very uncomfortable about it. But by the same token, for some reason right now, it's been very quiet. I think if I were to take a stab at why, is there is a problem in terms of taxes in the state of Vermont that needs to be resolved. This isn't, I don't believe, the way to do it, but that problem has to be addressed. And so I think the two easiest ways to make this come to a stall is to express your concerns directly to the legislators, and for some groups to come up with a better way. Right, those two things I think would make a big difference in terms of what they decide, or if they decide anything at all come December.
Layne,
So-
can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Have you heard of any education advocacy or activist group or superintendent's group or teachers union or any representative agency that is in favor of this plan?
No, but I've also, I think, some of my disappointment, like we've got the VPA and the Superintendent's Association, was that instead of saying, hey, we recognize that we got to fix taxes, but this isn't the way, they said, hey, we'll work with you.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you could, in one word or one sentence, because clearly it's not endorsed by the people that should be endorsing it, that, you know, the people, the educators, the administrators, the people who actually are the experts in the room, if they're not endorsing it, then that should give us pause. But also, well, I mean, it's given most of us on this call a pause already. But if you could, in one sentence or one word even, what is the point of this? And the people who are the people who are in favor of this, what do they think it's going to do? The benefit.
I mean, they actually stopped talking about it in this term, but when it was going through the passage, you know, the focus is taxes are too high, we need to fix it. And then they talked about the savings, right? That 184 million, that's why I know the number. And then when some of us put it into context and said, you're going to fundamentally change everything about education across the entire state with no understanding if it's going to work, to save 184 million out of a $2.7 billion budget, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, this just feels very Twilight Zone. Thank you
Yeah.
for doing this, by the way. This is,
So
yeah.
appreciate. Let's do a little bit of a closeout. Is there anything above and beyond, anything that we've touched on tonight that people feel is important to be communicated?
I mean, if we're talking about, worst case scenario, this is happening regardless. They're pushing it through. We got to redistrict. I think we need to make our own recommendations on how we would like to see the district. You know, I mean, that's the main idea right here, right? I think just in our own supervisory union, the schools we have, we'd like to come up with something that say, hey, these are the most like communities in our area. We share the most values in this area. You know, Cavendish, Ludlow, Mount Holly, Chester, we're all sister schools, I mean, sister towns. That's how I always grew up. That's how I look at it. So we should make some type of recommendation that this is a considered, maybe we get lucky and say it's 24 districts.
Yeah.
So maybe we can shrink this 4,000 number to 2,000. And we can play it in our region right here. So we can kind of have some sense of this is our school and in the valley, in the area here. And maybe that's a direction to make a recommendation, that we hold these groups together. We're not splitting up the supervisory union into two different districts. Some kids are going here, some kids are going here, but these towns are all kind of joining together and saying, hey, we want to work with something in this district.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, you got to play. I mean, yeah, this may never happen. This may get shot down, but I think
something's got to happen.
if we do something, we should be making a recommendation of what our values and what we want here.
I agree very much with what you just said. You know, I've been trying to pay attention to the task force. I've also tried to pay attention to the Committee on the Future of Public Education, and they welcome input. They're looking for community feedback on what they're proposing or novel ideas. I couldn't avoid playing with the app that's or the feature on the Vermont school district build, and you can build your own school district. So I try to see what it would take to make a district of 4,000 students, and it's this whole chunk in central Vermont that includes Chester. They came up with 4,200 students. Like you're saying, I think we need to see what a reasonable, you know, grouping is, what the number should be, and does that meet our needs?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be unique just to us here. I mean, you think about the Northeast Kingdom too. I mean, they're hurting worse than we are as far as I know what the numbers are. So it's something that trying to, you know, 9 districts seems insane to me to do it 9, but maybe we can get 24 out of it. If you get 24, maybe that makes a little more sense for everybody in the area to say, okay, we're holding on to something here, you know.
You had brought up a thought earlier on about, you know, where are they going to cluster people? Is it going to be close to, you know, the population centers? We're talking, right, if they stick with what the law is saying, the 4,000 to 8,000 students, we're talking, you know, somewhere in the vicinity of 13, 14, 15 districts, probably. Well, that's exactly how many technical centers we have across the state. So my guess is because a high proportion of students in Vermont go to the technical centers, is that's where the center focus is going to be. Okay. It kind of has to be if those institutions are serving so many students, just to be able to make it viable for every kid across the state to be able to reach one. So that would be my guess is where one of the redistricting recommendations is going to be. They are required to make one of the redistricting recommendations be about preserving the supervisory union model. So in other words, kind of like we are, right? You've got a superintendent in a central office that oversees 2 districts. Those districts would continue to exist, but you'd add a whole bunch of other districts to it with that one overseeing. Structurally, so go back. So there's the human side, there's the structure, and the business side. The human side is this is awesome because that's going to preserve local voice. So everybody's going to have their board, everybody's going to have their say. Structurally, I don't think it can work. Being someone who is working 2 different districts, and these are easy districts to work with. You know, there's some struggles and things at times, but it's nothing compared to most of the districts around the state. The fact that the policies and the governance systems are so different between Green Mountain and Ludlow Mount Holly, it's a lot of work. It's fun. I couldn't imagine doing this for 24 districts in a, you know, one, unless you had, you know, 12 or 13, you know, assistant superintendents or somebody that's a middle manager, but then it defeats the purpose of the cost.
Well, the other said earlier that you had brought up that if there's a larger SU, that the student should have, or the family should have school choice. Is that your recommendation if we combine SUs?
That was one of the pieces that Ludlow Mount Holly, everyone there felt was important. And they've got a unique perspective on it because if you think about Mount Holly, you've got kids that are right next door to Ludlow Elementary, and then the group that's way over here is a lot closer to Mill River. So the idea is that because a lot of these towns are so spread out, school choice will allow people to pick the school that's closest to them or that has a program that they desperately need. Right? That's one of the things, like with special education that we used to do in OSSD. You know, we had 5 schools that were pretty well separated, probably about equal to here. But the level of like special education services that we could provide was different depending upon the school and the population. So we would allow the students to move around. If I had a student that had a need that was going to be best served in this school over here, and the parents were fine with it, then we moved them over there so they got the best services. And so I think that's a part of what the Ludlow Mount Holly piece is about as well. It's about location, the geography, but it's also about getting the best services, best programs for kids. So yeah, I personally, I think that would be a requirement. The thing that, oh, go ahead.
Well, a note on what you just said. So, in terms of, choice and parents picking, was it a parent decision, or was it a mutual, IEP team decision, or was it the school saying we have to place you here?
No, we would never be able to, right? Be able
Awesome,
to force
yeah.
that would be a huge violation. But no, we would talk with the parents. Lots of times the parents themselves would bring it up. So we brought a little bit of the model over here. There is a hardship protocol within the district that if a parent is stating that I've got this hardship, like this school over here would better serve my child, these are the reasons why. We've lived in Ludlow, Mount Holly. We've gone to Ludlow Elementary School for 4 of the 6 years. And we suddenly had to change apartments, and now we're in Chester. Can my kid stay? Yeah, that's better for the kid. And if it's not going to disrupt the classes, make them too big, then that makes sense, right? So it's about.
I come from a state where it was, you don't really, even though parents were supposed to have an equal say, they didn't. So that's of course where my concern is at when I see things changing like this so dramatically, is where, kids getting bussed around and moved around, and it's a concern.
The parents should be the primary. The problem that might come up though, is that if it's full school choice and 100% parent, not a problem for me, but the structural problem is you will have some schools that will shut down.
Well, yeah, and you won't, and if you don't have the right resources, the supports and services at that, you can't go. You can't
make those towns happy.
Yeah, and that's where I see it. That's where I see the problem. If we're already in a related services shortage and special educator shortage, I don't see how it's going to work. But yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
I guess one last concern I have is that, and I don't know if this has been brought up at all yet. We're mostly been talking about finances and buildings and that sort of stuff. But whenever you consolidate and all of a sudden an administration is dealing with a much larger population and more teachers that are teaching the same subject, but in different areas to fill those, is that often what happens is they bring in these curriculum coordinators and they purchase some sort of canned curriculum, probably comes from Florida or Texas, that, it may be a better curriculum than some of the programs they're currently running, but it's certainly a less rigorous, lesser curriculum than what a lot of the individual teachers are running. And so you actually end up, you squeeze both ends of the lower and the higher, and in the end you end up with instruction and curriculum that is not as high a quality as the teachers who are really, designing stellar curriculums and running amazing programs. You end up with more of like this middle ground, not as good as that, maybe better than a couple, but it kind of dumbs down the curriculum as well, because they're too afraid of managing all these teachers doing different things. They want to consolidate not just buildings, but what is being taught within the buildings. And I think that could have a really detrimental effect on Vermont schools, because, we're rated pretty highly when you compare to the entire state, especially in those lower grades. And I think we're gonna wash out a lot of those gains when we start standardizing curriculum and buying these packaged things that just make life easier but lower the quality of teaching.
Yeah, and under the current rules, so that I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Under the current rules, it will be the state itself that is making the decision on what those curriculums have to be. That's a major part of that standardization that they have and that they put into place.
Right, and we've seen how the state handles things like the proficiency rollout, where they just kind of said, this looks fun, let's try it and see what everybody does. And all of a sudden you have 400 different models and kids can't move between districts because all of the graduation requirements are different at every school. Unfortunately, our state system isn't funded well enough to create something quality. So it ends up chaos, and usually it just disappears after about 5 years because of that.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've noticed coming in from Massachusetts, as we kind of wrap up a little bit here, is that the state here does an awful lot of mandates in terms of telling the schools what they have to do, right? You have your graduation proficiencies, you have your standards-based report cards. I've seen a lot of those mandates. The state will give you a model sometimes, but usually it's left up to the individual districts to figure out how they do that, which is not cost effective. And if any of those initiatives that the legislator told us we had to do, because they have been faithfully carried out within the schools, actually had any value, we would have seen the scores go up across the state, and they haven't. And so when you know something is not working, why do you keep that mandate on the schools and then blame the schools for, we wish you were doing better? That's been at least a personal frustration of mine that other folks may or may not agree with, but it is a concern that I personally have is, you got some really good talented people, get them together, figure out what it is we got to do and let them run with it. Yeah, it's interesting. And it's been a good conversation tonight. If there are other thoughts and ideas, I'm usually pretty easy to get a hold of if folks, want to stop in and talk, or if other ideas come up afterwards, don't be afraid to shoot me an email. I'm happy to take that and integrate it into the communication. Like I said earlier, the next steps will be, as we get towards the middle of September, is to have a communication that's put together, has been kind of viewed by the TRSU public, so that they have some input into it, to do kind of final adjustments to it, and then to get it off to that redistricting committee by the end of the month. Is kind of where we're at. But if other ideas come up, especially good ideas, a better way that the state could go about, fixing the tax system that they have, because it does need to be fixed, those are good things to share too. Because if we can put pressure on the legislators that, we're not happy because we don't think this is going to work, and we've got something that might work better, I think that'll put us in a pretty good position to be able to shift things in a much better direction than it looks like we're on right now. Kind of leave it at that. Yeah.
Thank you, Layne.
You too. I appreciate everyone coming out. It was actually, I love these conversations, and I talk too much too. I'm a verbal processor. So all it means is I'm hearing what you're saying. And as I'm talking about this stuff, it's kind of clarifying ideas in my mind. So it's really important to me, and I appreciate it an awful lot.